Thank you all. This is Shelley Thomas. Thank you for joining us this morning. I apologize for Jessica not being able to join us right at the moment, but we would like to go ahead and get this started. So we hope that you enjoy the information that you're going to receive today, as we have looked at incident reports over time. There's just a lot of misunderstanding of what should be in an investigation, and what are the requirements for a provider, and what is it you need to be reporting out. So we hope that this is a valuable information for you, and that if you have questions, please type them in the chat and we will address those at the end. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this back over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Shelley. Good morning, everyone. Jessica will be joining us. She should be here by the end for the questions and answers. I wanted you also to know, as far as housekeeping, that I do have live transcription enabled, which will give the subtitles. So if that would be helpful to you, you just turn on the closed captioning live transcription and you'll be able to see the subtitles. They're auto-generated, so they might not be exact, but if that would be helpful for you, that is enabled. And I am recording this, so the recording will be housed on the BQIS playlist on the FSSA YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit it at any time, or for individuals who were unable to join us for this live session. As I mentioned, we're going to hold the questions answers until the end so that we don't get off track and or confuse people. So if you just use the Q&A feature, we'll be able to see those questions and create a list of those and go through those with the most appropriate person to answer them at the end. And again, if you could just use the chat for immediate things that you need, that would help us kind of keep things organized, because we do have a large number of you joining us, which we're really excited about. Just makes managing it a little challenging. So again, I'm Jennifer Akers. I'm the Training and Engagement Manager at Liberty for BQIS, and I work with both BQIS and the Liberty team. So they are here as well, so that if you have specific questions about the complaint process, the incident reporting process, or mortality, I have the individuals who could best speak to that on this, as well as Shelley Thomas, who's the Assistant Director at BQIS. So let's go ahead and get started. We're discussing this topic today because the prime objective of an incident investigation is to prevent future incidents. They're not to point blame or to apply discipline. The incident investigation helps us to gather the factual information of who, what, where, when, and how. Once this information's been gathered, we can analyze the incident and identify the why, or the root causes. Root causes are the underlying causes or fundamental reasons for the incident. When an employee cuts his hand because he wasn't wearing gloves while handling sharp material, most people would say, open shut case of employee negligence, not wearing personal protective equipment, re-tearing the employee and go back to business as usual. But if we use further analysis, we might identify that the employee wasn't provided with gloves, or the supervisor never wears his gloves and doesn't require his guys to wear them. Maybe the gloves provided aren't the right glove for the job, and employees often remove them. It may cause us to reevaluate our training program. There are many factors that can be at play when determining the root causes of incidents. Blaming incidents on employee negligence or misbehavior without further investigation will probably do little to prevent future incidents. If we instead identify the root causes, we can then identify and implement appropriate corrective actions. This may require that we change our processes, implement controls, conduct assessments, provide proper equipment, and/or conduct training. In this training, we're going to look at investigation requirements, types, and components, what constitutes an effective investigation, and best practices, including root cause analysis and quality improvement. It's the policy of the Bureau of Quality Improvement Services, or BQIS, to utilize an incident reporting and management system as an integral tool in ensuring the health and welfare of individuals receiving services administered by the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities, or BEDS. These activities also include mandated investigative components. The requirement is that activities initiated by a provider that require mandated investigative components include internal reviews of the death of an individual receiving services, investigations into alleged abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an individual receiving services, investigations into significant injuries of unknown origin as defined in the incident reporting policy, and investigations as otherwise requested by the DDARS director or the Bequest director. And this came right from code. So this is the requirement for mandated investigative components. An investigation means an orderly collection of data or facts to describe an incident or event. And there are several different types that sometimes overlap. And so we're going to look at how those different entities have different roles, but that they all work together to ensure that the individual's health and safety are being considered. So each entity has specific responsibilities regarding investigations and the results, and at times the entity's investigation will overlap and include information from another entity, but they have separate responsibilities. And that investigation is defined as the process of identifying, collecting, and assessing the evidence in a systemic manner. The purpose of an investigation is to objectively describe and explain what did or didn't occur at a given place and time. And so now we'll look at some of the different types of investigations and the different purposes they serve. Criminal investigations are conducted by the officials of public law to determine if a crime has occurred and identify the individuals liable to punishment. Protective services agencies conduct investigations specific to abuse, neglect, and exploitation. As someone who works with individuals with disabilities, you are mandated reporters when abuse is suspected. For example, an individual may have been the victim of physical abuse in a BEAD setting. Adult Protective Services may investigate and work with law enforcement officials to bring charges against the perpetrator, and in some cases, BQIS would also investigate to ensure the provider followed all rules, policies, and requirements in supporting the individual. Another protection agency is Indiana Disability Rights. They monitor facilities such as group homes, workshops, nursing homes, psychiatric residential treatment facilities, and mental health facilities for signs of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. BQIS conducts investigations as part of the incident management system, which includes incidents, complaints, and mortality. Providers too have requirements for investigations, and those will be the focus of this presentation. Provider internal investigations should be conducted by a person trained in the agency's policies and investigative methods, collect facts and data about the event, resolve any discrepancies, and make a determination if individual rights have been violated and/or if services and care were appropriate or not. It also determines if corrective or preventative action needs to be taken, and we want to adequately address the situation and prevent future incidents. If you're uncertain about the mandatory components of a provider internal investigation, you can find them outlined in DDARS code and policy. If a checklist format would be helpful, we can provide one that would look similar to the screen, only the complete list of 18 components. And then there are some additional components for mortality. So I'm going to put that investigative checklist on the BQIS web page when we post the recording and other resources from this webinar. A provider can include additional components above and beyond the DDARS code and policy, but this is the required standard that must be included. To ensure individuals receiving HCBS services are receiving quality services, we review hundreds of incident reports each month, as well as complaints and mortality. We often see any or all of the components missing from the report or an indication that no internal investigation was done. So these are some of the most common issues we see with internal investigations. The letter after it just happens to match what internal component is missing, if you're wondering what those indicate. So we frequently see a lack of signed and dated statements, and instead the interviewees' representations are embedded in the investigator's commentary, and so it's difficult to find and/or make sure that it's been signed and dated. We often see missing documents and reports, missing evidence to support findings of the investigation, that discrepancies aren't identified or resolved or explained, that there's a lack of determination if rights have been violated, if services and/or care were not provided, if agency policies or procedures weren't followed, and if any federal or state regulations were not followed. All of these things are supposed to be part of an internal investigation, so it's problematic when they're missing. We also see some confusion about which agency is responsible when APS, police, or others are involved, and that's why we tried to identify which entity is which, and the fact that sometimes those do overlap. And if there's a question, you can always ask for clarification from BQIS. So the expectations that we have are the following. We just kind of summarized what we're looking for to try and cut down on the back and forth when we continue to ask questions and to make sure that you're following what the expectations are of internal investigations. So for those incidents where certain steps of an investigation can't be completed, please include an explanation as to why that particular part of the investigation can't be done. Then we'll know that there was a reason and not that it's missing. So if an individual or guardian has declined to be interviewed, please note the attempts and reasons the interview was not conducted. In all reports of alleged abuse, neglect, or exploitation, regardless of who the alleged perpetrator is, documentation is required stating whether the allegations have been substantiated or unsubstantiated. So the provider should indicate if they have been able to substantiate the allegations, or if they're unable to substantiate the allegations based on the information gathered during their internal investigation. Here are some sample scenarios that we sometimes see and what we would expect in each case. So the alleged perpetrator is a community member or family member. The team may determine that they're unable to conduct an interview with that alleged perpetrator, so it should be documented in the investigation that the interview of the alleged perpetrator is unable to be completed and why. In some investigations, the police has started their own investigation and have advised the team or provider not to interview the individual witness or alleged perpetrator. So documentation of that directive from the police should be included in the investigation. And again, this helps us better differentiate between what is missing and what was done or not completed with a valid reason why it was not completed. So it's important to include that information in your investigation. We need robust investigations to ensure quality beat services. As professionals, we must be vigilant in doing no harm and supporting optimal health and safety. Our approach should be person-centered and respect-informed decision-making, but we still have responsibility to mitigate risk when possible and support individuals to live their best lives. It's all about balancing important to and important for and respecting the individual. Before I continue, I just want to remind you, if you could please put your questions and answers in the Q&A instead of the chat, that will help us keep those separate. Just use chat only for questions you have about actually how the webinar works, like you can't hear something or something like that. And then your actual questions about what I'm presenting, if those could go in the Q&A, it will really help the people who will be answering it keep track of that and make sure we don't lose any of them. Thanks. So let's play detective for a few minutes. Okay, I'm getting a message you cannot hear it. So give me 1 second.
I was clearly.
Can you hear it now? All right, thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Let's try again.
Somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
That's right, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
So, how did you do? This video demonstrates situation awareness. It's a concept that's been around in aviation, healthcare, and the military for many years. The benefits associated with situational awareness are significant, with an increase in safety, task, team, and organizational performance as the most important outcomes. One of the key objectives of situational awareness is error identification and prevention. In a similar way, situational awareness can contribute to the continuous improvement process in teams and organizations on two levels. First, improved situational awareness can help to identify issues before negative consequences emerge. And second, the concept helps to go through a structured learning process and identify situations which could have been avoided with a proper level of situational awareness. Measures to improve situational awareness are associated with an increase in safety and task performance. One of the ways we can improve our awareness of incidents is through effective investigations. If we use established criteria to objectively investigate incidents, we can use the evidence to analyze it, address any discrepancies, reach conclusions about the contributing factors, and make recommendations to correct or prevent actions. There are local and national trainings for investigators, including those offered by Labor Relations Alternatives, or LRA, and Bequest is happy to provide additional resources to you if you have an interest in those. Your agency should have established criteria for investigations. Before initiating any investigation, knowledge of the applicable federal, state, and local laws governing administrative or civil investigations is critical. Your agency should have knowledgeable, trained individuals conducting any investigations. The investigator must have a reputation for honesty and credibility and have the ability to provide reassurance to individuals involved in the incident. The investigator must possess critical thinking skills and think like a historian in creating an investigation that's thorough, organized, and competently conducted. Standard protocols should be used to identify, collect, and analyze evidence. There are generally 4 stages of activities occurring in any investigation: intake and preservation of evidence, identification and collection of evidence, the analysis and presentation of the evidence collected, and quality review, including implementation of recommendations and corrective actions. A critical value associated with rules of evidence quality investigations are judged by its speed. The rules of evidence related to speed exist because there's what's considered the half-life of evidence. All evidence changes character over time. The form of a piece of evidence takes today will evolve and become different tomorrow, so it's important to react promptly. Another key element of quality investigations are the rules associated with objectivity. Objectivity in the broadest sense is the ability to describe or perceive something without being influenced by personal emotions and experiences, bias, or opinion. Fact-finding investigations must be conducted from what will be viewed by others as an objective, unbiased, third-party, or arm's-length approach. When you're fact-finding, there are 4 forms of evidence available to the investigator. Testimonial evidence is a witness's communication to an investigator of their memories of the observations in relation to the time and place of the incident under investigation, the story that they're telling. A witness's capacity to observe and create memory derives from the senses, what a witness saw, heard, tasted, felt, or smelled. Documentary evidence is by the means by which testimonial evidence is preserved, either in writing or electronically. One important form of documentary evidence produced during an investigation includes written statements prepared by witnesses. Other forms of relevant documentary evidence to be identified and collected during an investigation are the business records of an organization, including records of the individual receiving services, personnel records, including time and attendance and training records, fiscal records and administrative records, meaning policies, procedures, meeting minutes, etc. Physical evidence includes the things themselves, like clothes or injuries. The spatial relationship amongst those things, like the movement, distance, barriers that impact a witness's ability to see or hear things, as well as the absence of things that otherwise would have been present if a version of testimony is to be considered accurate. Based on testimony provided by witnesses, examples may include the absence of injury that otherwise should reasonably be present, or the condition of the environment where the incident allegedly occurred, including movement and location of people and things in the environment. Demonstrative evidence, which is the means by which physical evidence is preserved, such as photographs of injuries, diagrams of the environment where the incident occurred, X-rays or CT scans assessing the individual for internal injury, etc. Next, the evidence as a whole must be examined for gaps, holes, or other discrepancies, and a determination made whether further investigation will be able to clarify the needed missing information. You should identify the primary questions needing to be answered as a result of the investigation, analyze the evidence in relation to the rules of evidence used to reconcile or weigh the evidence in order to determine the preponderance of evidence that leads to the final conclusions or finding of facts. The analysis should be drawn from the evidence and should not include speculation by the investigator. If in the review of evidence discrepancies are found, you should seek to resolve those discrepancies by re-interviewing people. Like, do you need more clarification or details? Is there something else you can someone else you can interview who might bring additional perspective or observations? Do you need to find additional documents that support different versions of the events? Do the timelines match? If not, what missing information do you need in order to align them? Do the observations seem legitimate? Was it possible that they didn't get some details correct or that documentary evidence doesn't match the physical evidence? How can you resolve these discrepancies? Your investigation report should include a description of the incident event, which is a clear statement of why it was important to conduct an investigation, the nature of the allegation or event, such as abuse, neglect, mistreatment, exploitation, or injury of unknown origin, a description of the investigative procedure, which is a timeline of the event, identification of all the interviews, signed and dated statements from all parties, an itemized list of evidence collected, where evidence is stored if not attached to the report, and the process of evidence analysis, a summary of evidence, which is analysis of all of the evidence collected, a brief summary of the pertinent facts uncovered in the investigation that leads you to a conclusion that determines if corrective action is needed. And we, again, can make sure that you have this list. I can provide you with a copy of these slides, or again, we are recording this. Your conclusion should be substantiated by the facts and evidence and identify the following: whether or not individual rights were violated and which ones, if care or services were not provided or were inappropriately provided, if policies, procedures were not followed, and if abuse, neglect, mistreatment, or exploitation occurred, it must be stated. Your recommendations should be person-centered, focus on safety and least restrictive measures, be related to the underlying cause of the incident, be developed as part of a clear risk mitigation strategy to decrease the likelihood of a similar incident in the future, and linked to the specific incident or related to an organizational change to prevent similar incidents to all individuals. Your preventative plans can be more robust and effective if you consider conducting a root cause analysis, which is what we're going to discuss next. When you watched the whodunit video, you were probably concentrating on the investigator and the suspect's responses. You were focused on the superficial things happening right in front of you, on the surface. What you probably missed were the environmental changes also happening right before your eyes. When you look at incidents, you need to be objective, open-minded, responsive, and continue to seek the deeper root cause of the incident. Root cause analysis is a process of discovery that attempts to find out exactly what happened, why it happened, and how it can be prevented from happening again. Consequently, the goal of root cause analysis is prevention. Perhaps more importantly, root cause analysis places a focus on understanding, not on blame. It begins from the basic premise that errors and failures are results of flaws in the system, not simply the action or inaction of people. Thus, unlike the traditional process of investigation, root cause analysis doesn't focus on finding out who made the mistake, but rather why the mistake was made. The emphasis is on identifying the environmental and system factors that directed or allowed a person or persons to make the mistakes in the first place. Root cause analysis involves an exploration of cause and effect relationships. It requires a thorough review and analysis of human factors, organizational and support systems, and the formal and informal processes that guide the actions of people within the organization or agency. It does this by directing a series of why questions over and over again to identify the actual and potential contribution different factors have to causing the event under study. Once causative and contributory factors are identified, the process is repeated to uncover potential solutions and improvements to the system that can act as barriers to prevent future failures. When conducting a root cause analysis, asking why something happened or didn't happen is the best place to start. In many cases, the most obvious cause is the direct cause, and to determine contributing factors, we have to ask why the direct cause occurred. For example, the boat sank because it had a hole in the bottom. In this example, the hole in the boat is the direct cause. In a root cause analysis, asking why is the next step. In this example, the boat had a hole because the repair person didn't know the boat had a hole that needed to be fixed. This would be a contributing factor. Asking why the repaired person didn't know the boat had a hole to be fixed, we learn the root cause of the problem. The boat repair company doesn't have a system to track required repairs, and the need to repair the hole was forgotten. In many organizations or agencies, the demand for immediate action can result in a tendency to select the most expedient process and solution. This need to act often results in repeated and sometimes frenzied efforts to manage symptoms rather than the underlying problem that's responsible for the continued appearance of adverse effects or system failures. Expediency can be a double-edged sword. Program and system managers should therefore establish formal or informal criteria to help them decide when to pause and take a more comprehensive approach to problem solving, including the use of root cause analysis. We know from our work in services for people with developmental disabilities that rarely, if ever, does any one thing cause an incident to occur. Generally, incidents occur because of a combination of different factors. It's this unique combination of factors that results in an accident, illness, or injury. Think about causal analysis as peeling an onion to reveal all contributing causes to an incident. In order to develop appropriate preventative action that'll lessen the likelihood of the incident recurring, contributing causes need to be examined, and they frequently fall into different categories. It could be the staff and/or the person with a disability, communication issues, equipment issues, issues with policy, whether they were in place, known, followed, and effective, issues with the environment, or a root cause that exists within leadership. In general, the root cause analysis process involves performing a detailed description of everything that happened before, during, and immediately after the adverse event. The process often makes use of flow charting to provide visual illustrations of the sequence and interrelationships between the activities and the various components within the agency that may have had an involvement with the incident you're studying. This is followed by brainstorming to identify factors that may have contributed to the incident, and a process of classifying and prioritizing these factors to identify the true root cause. Additional time is then spent identifying possible solutions, resulting in the selection of those that appear to be most effective. So let's look at an example. Mary, a woman in her late 60s, fell when she got out of bed this morning. What are the possible causes for Mary's fall? Perhaps Mary was dizzy when she stood up due to blood pressure problems. Maybe Mary has an ear infection that affected her balance. Maybe Mary's roommates had spilled something on the floor, or the overnight staff moved Mary's shoes and she tripped, or the room was dark and she couldn't identify the obstacles. If this is a common occurrence for Mary, we might want to do a root cause analysis to determine the root cause of the issue. Does Mary have a history of medical issues or medications that might make her dizzy? Has she recently had a change in status? Is it the environment? Does she need different flooring or a better pathway that's more accessible? Has staff been properly trained to keep the pathways clear? Does Mary have a cane or walker? Was it available to her? Does she know how to use it properly? Is it in good working order? If we determine the causes, we can better prevent future incidents. One of the best ways to start identifying the root causes is to ask why repeatedly. When possible causes are identified, you can develop plans to address those causes. This example came from the Oregon Patient Safety Commission, so they are talking about residents. We would be talking about individuals. But we look at the fact that Mary fell in her room, and we continue to ask why, to figure out what the underlying cause was, and then to come up with a plan to prevent that from happening. So Mary fell, and we ask why. She tripped over a chair, so our plan is to remove or move the chair. We still ask why. Why'd she trip over it? Because she didn't see it. Why didn't she see the chair? Because the room was dark, so our plan is going to be to put night lights that are motion censored in their room, as long as Mary agrees to that. It hadn't been there because it wasn't part of the plan of care. Why wasn't it part of the plan of care? Because Mary was assessed as not at risk for falling, and that plan needed to be updated. So by asking a series of questions of why things happened, we can better figure out what the root causes of why Mary fell were. So if we're doing the investigation, we can help gather and document what happened and why. What other information do we need to identify the contributing factors leading to the incident? So we'd interview staff and others closely involved. We would write what they thought happened, the sequence of events, and why. We would use open-ended questions like "tell me about," and then we might make a diagram of the scene at the time of discovery to attach it to the investigation, showing the position of the furniture, doors, doorways, equipment, and where the individual fell or was found. Then we can review the findings and identify gaps and gather any missing information. So we might review the records, any fall history, interview and re-interview if we need to, look at the plan of care, look at the PCISP, and then outline the sequence of events leading up to the fall and list the possible contributing factors. As noted, contributing factors often fall into several categories. Is it the staff, the person with the disability, communication, equipment, environment, policies, and/or leadership? What might have been the contributing factors in this incident? So again, we want to ask questions. So we're going to look for identifying possible contributing factors. So in this case, there are several possible contributing factors. Environmental might include lighting issues, a different type of flooring, where the furniture was placed. Possible factors within the environment might be underlying medical conditions or sensory challenges individuals have, particularly as they age or have a change in status. It might be equipment, the bed height or the possible need for side rails, a cane or walker or wheelchair, whichever is most appropriate, a bed alarm if needed, and monitoring other ways to call for help, maybe a personal response system or a bell or some way to alert that there was an issue. There might also be medication side effects, weakness, dizziness, gait disturbance, impaired vision, agitation or impulsiveness, or there might be medication interactions or classes that are having issues. Maybe she's having some interactions between her drug and the food that she's eating, like you can't drink milk or take iron supplements or certain times, or that the drug then isn't effective, so that would need to be considered. And if there's any sort of cardiovascular or hyperglycemic issue or psychopharmacological side effects or interactions or types of medications. So once we know the possible whys, how can we prevent future incidents and what actions can we take? A good first step is to discuss the issue with the individual and her team. What preventative measures can we put in place to mitigate risk and prevent future falls? So during the team meeting, we could talk about the fact that one of her risks for Mary now is falls. And the problem we're trying to solve with the risk mitigation plan is that she's had an increase in falls in the last quarter. If we don't put a risk mitigation plan in place and do nothing, what might happen? She's at risk of medical complications from the falls, and she loses her independence and mobility, which are really important to her. What actions did the team decide to manage this risk? They're going to offer a fall risk assessment and a tailored personal plan for Mary and consider exercise, pharmacy consult, home assessment, and possible adaptive equipment. And this falls under Mary's healthy living domain. Perhaps we decide that a prevention plan is needed, so we're going to offer fall risk screenings and assessments to Mary and anyone with an identified need. When we complete the assessment, we work with the individual to provide a personal care plan based on their preferences. What level of risk does Mary consider acceptable? What are the consequences of not implementing the plan so she understands that? Have we provided enough information so Mary can make an informed decision? And have we used the integrated support star or other tools to facilitate the discussion? If the individual agrees to the interventions, what do we have in place to ensure our plan is consistent across settings and staffing? Is there training that is needed? Do we need to put additional supports in place? And how can the individual self-identify and advocate for any changes that need to be made for her? Once we decide on an action plan, it's best to test it. And we do this within BQIS as well. The Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDSA method's a way to test a change that's implemented. Going through the prescribed 4 steps guides the thinking process into breaking down the task into steps and then evaluating the outcome, improving on it, and testing again. Most of us go through this, some or all of these steps when we implement change in our lives and we don't even think about it. So for Mary, we might plan to offer fall risk assessments to 5 individuals with the highest incidence of falls and hope this produces a reduction in falls. So we're going to conduct or do the assessments. As part of the assessment, we'll discuss what's important to the individual and what's important for them. Then we're going to study the effectiveness of the interventions by tracking how many of those individuals have a reduction in falls. We're also going to track the interventions they chose, how consistently they were implemented, how many people didn't follow through and why, and which interventions were the easiest to implement or the most successful. And then after implementing this plan, we'll look at whether it worked or not. And if it didn't work, what can we do differently in our next cycle to address that? And if it did work, are we ready to offer it to more individuals? So why are preventative measures or actions important? James Reason compares human systems to layers of Swiss cheese. Each layer is a defense against something going wrong, mistakes or failures of the system. There are holes in the defense because no human system is perfect because we aren't machines. Something breaking through one hole isn't a huge problem because things go wrong occasionally. As humans, we've developed to cope with minor failures, mistakes as a routine part of life. Something goes wrong, we fix it, we move on. Within our systems, however, there are often several layers of defense or more slices of Swiss cheese. Things can become a major problem when failures follow a path through all the holes in the Swiss cheese, when all the defense layers have been broken because the holes have lined up. Strong and effective preventive actions can be the barrier that minimizes future incidents. When we review plans to resolve incidents, we often see generic actions that could be strengthened to better address the root cause and prevent future incidents. We need strong barriers or pieces of Swiss cheese or layers of defense to be effective. So rather than saying we're going to retrain staff on a fall risk plan, a stronger action would be to conduct fall risk assessments and tailor the supports needed to reduce risks. Rather than simply saying we're going to have staff review the medication list, we could arrange a meeting with the doctor or pharmacist to understand the medication side effects that might be relevant to even more than that individual. And instead of simply saying we're going to provide comfort measures, we could talk to Mary about her concerns and address them to ensure she maintains her independence. We conducted a fall risk assessment for Mary, followed by tailored interventions and referrals to address any identified risks. Mary now has the following preventions in place. She has gait, balance, or functional training with a physical therapist. She has a schedule that includes Tai Chi, walking, yoga, or other exercise. She's going to have a home assessment and modifications like grab bars, motion detector lights, and a personal alert system. She has a pharmacy primary care consult scheduled about prescribed medication side effects that might include higher risk of dizziness, imbalance, or injury. And also we're going to talk about vitamins or supplements like calcium or vitamin D she might want to consider. So we're supporting Mary to maintain her independence and mobility, her vision of a good life, and what's important to her. We've helped Mary, so now let's look at this on a broader scale. Once a root cause analysis has been completed and the organization is confident that the root causes were identified, the next steps to develop a comprehensive quality improvement plan. A comprehensive quality improvement plan is a detailed work plan intended to enhance an agency's quality in a target area, like falls, medication administration, aggression, neglect, whatever the identified target area might be. A quality improvement plan includes essential information about how your organization will design, implement, manage, and assess quality. All aspects of the quality improvement plan correlate to the identified root causes. A quality improvement plan is an organization's framework for developing and improving processes. It includes the direction, timeline, activities, and assessment measures of quality and quality improvement within the agency. The quality improvement plan is a living document, and as such, it's revisited on a regular basis to document accomplishments, lessons learned, and changing agency priorities. If your agency is interested in developing a quality improvement plan, we can provide some templates and examples. We reference several existing resources to create this training, so if you'd like to dig deeper into some of these topics or concepts, this list would be helpful. BQIS also has several resources available to you to support your work. I'm happy to send those to you, we also plan to add them to the BQIS website under the materials for this recording. So we can provide an internal investigation checklist, like the sample that I showed you. We can provide a root cause template, a root cause analysis guide, a comprehensive quality improvement plan template, and a comprehensive quality improvement plan guide and example. So if you would like to utilize any of these resources, we're happy to make those available to you. We want to work with you to ensure that all people are empowered to live, love, learn, work, play, and pursue their dreams. We're in this together. Not only is BQIS here to support you, but other providers can also be a source of support and expertise. We encourage you to network with other providers who might have more experience and expertise with investigations. And there are also national trainings, as I mentioned, available to providers and to individuals. If you need additional information, you can contact BQIS at 800-545-7763 or email bequishelp@fssa.in.gov. We want to encourage you, as always, to sign up for the DDARS listserv if you haven't already, to make sure you get announcements like the announcement that will come out when this recording is available and the resources have been posted to the BQIS website. Also, to follow the BEADS Facebook page. Jessica and Kathy frequently go live every other Friday at noon to give kind of quick updates on things that are happening. Also, I send resources and others send resources to them about webinars, trainings, fact sheets, different things that might be of assistance to you as providers or whatever your role might be. We want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to have question and answers here in a second, but in case you're leaving and not staying for those, I'm going to be sending a short survey that I hope you'll take the time to complete so we can improve future trainings. So if you could, it'll just be like 5 quick questions. If you could fill that out, that's really helpful to make sure that the trainings meet your needs. So we're going to take some time now for questions and answers. If for some reason we can't address them here, I do have your emails because the Zoom webinar actually collects those as you sign in. So I know who attended if you have a question about whether we have a record of your attendance, and I will have your email. So if we don't get to your question, I can follow up with you individually after this. So I am going to go ahead and ask Janet and or Jessica or Shelley to unmute and help us get through some of the questions and answers. Again, if you're not staying for those, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this was helpful. And if you need any of the resources that were mentioned here, feel free to reach out to Bequist, or you have my email from the invite you got for the webinar. I follow the pattern of everybody else, my first name dot last name. So it's jennifer.akers, A-K-E-R-S, at fssa.in.gov. Okay.
Okay, Jessica, did you make it on?
Apparently not. This is Shelley, though.
All right. Thanks, Shelley. Jessica and I have been messaging. She's having some technical problems, and apparently there was a power outage at the government center that she is also trying to work through. So we will go ahead and begin to answer your questions with the support of my many panelists. So the first question was, will Bequist ever have a system or portal that providers can log in to ensure there is not staff hopping between companies? At this point, there are no processes in place to make that happen. It's something that Bequist, realizes would be a benefit and have been discussing. Shelley, I don't know if you have anything additional to share as far as future plans about that.
No, we don't. It's one of those situations where if you have individuals who have been terminated for alleged abuse, neglect, and exploitation, but they haven't had an actual legal conviction of it, it becomes a very muddy system because then you get liability because you're saying that they did this and they may not have done this, because there's no legal, backing you. So just having said that, it is something we've thought about. We're still discussing, but there's no firm plans in the works for this.
Great, thank you, Shelley. So then we have a question or a comment with a question. It is sometimes difficult getting a staff to turn in a written statement. What we've done recently is record what questions each staff were asked with a record of their statements, and then we get staff signatures to verify what was recorded when was discussed with them. Would this be sufficient? I believe, yes, that we do accept that. We know that sometimes people struggle with putting, their actual words in writing. And so as long as you record what they have said, they have an opportunity to review it and then sign kind of an affirmation saying that, yes, this is what I conveyed to the person who did the interview, then it should be an acceptable way to present that information. Okay, so then we have a question about do providers need to investigate an A&E even when it is an outside entity? For example, an allegation of abuse by a parent on a child or waiver recipient. The question then goes on to say that, it could put the provider in a difficult situation if they substantiate, and then what legally happens as a result of that. So, the initial thing is that you need to report it if you believe that it occurred. It kind of gets muddy if the parent is the staff person, because at that point you have an obligation to investigate. So Shelley, I don't know if you have anything further to talk about there.
I would just add, there could be alleged A&E by a community member or a parent. The provider needs, to do the best in reporting the facts as far as the investigation, but also know that you should be handing that over to APS or CPS to pick it up, because there's going to be times where you can't come to a conclusion, but you've done the best you can to investigate given the circumstances. So, we do understand there's going to be times you're not going to be able to fully get all the information due to the circumstance. So, and that's a case-by-case situation.
Great, thank you. And I believe that Jessica has successfully joined us and can now speak.
Hi guys, sorry about that. Having some issues over here. Technology is not my friend today.
All right, so Jessica, you are just in time to answer the question that we were chatting about regarding the completion of an investigation, and should it be shared with the IST? Should the entire investigative report be shared, or just the outcome and the findings? And then that leads into the next question that we were chatting about regarding how much of the report should be shared with the case manager.
Yeah, so I think, and this is regarding, I believe, the internal investigation that the provider conducts. I don't know that I have an exact answer. I mean, I think it depends really on the situation. I mean, I personally, I would like a team to be able to see the results of an investigation. I think sometimes there's information regarding an employee and the actions that are taken, and I know that that can be sensitive and possibly not, all that isn't necessarily shared with an entire team, but I would have conversations with the individual and their guardian, if there is a guardian involved, to discuss that. But I think it's beneficial for everyone to really see what went on with a particular incident and how it was resolved, and obviously going forward, how it's to prevent it from happening again. And then Janet, the second question was regarding case managers. Well, sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so there were two questions about case managers. One is, should they also be getting the entire investigation? And then what is their role in completing an investigation if there is not a provider involved?
So yes, I mean, if they are part of the team, excuse me. So I mean, they would get that, again, that investigation report. I think there's certain information in there regarding, again, if maybe disciplinary action, it might not be able to be shared regarding an employee, but they would be part of the team. In terms of an investigation a case manager would do, if it's regarding their own employee, so a case manager, that would be an investigation obviously they would do. If it's, an individual that only has case management as a service, and it's, something that happens to the individual, let's say their parent, maybe there's an abusive situation with their parent. I mean, again, that goes back to the case manager is not going to do a full investigation there. They would need, to me, they would want to ensure, right, that the police are notified, things like that, but that's going to be a situation that's really outside that provider, investigation protocol, because it's not, it's a parent and an individual and not necessarily based on a waiver service. We would want case management if something is happening with a provider, residential provider, to ensure, that the investigation was thorough and complete. I don't think they need to go through every fine detail, but, doing their due diligence to make sure that, you know, that the investigation was thorough, the individual was interviewed, you know, that everything was done appropriately and reported to us. So there are those, you know, those second eyes that are on it to make sure everything is being done appropriately.
Okay, then we have, oh, sorry. Was someone else going to add something? All right, so the next question was, besides abuse, neglect, exploitation, and mistreatment, what other types of incidents need to be investigated?
I'm trying to think of what our I mean, everything obviously is going to be looked at, right? I mean, every incident needs to have some sort of investigation. It's just going to look different, right? So, I mean, if, you know, something happens that's sort of outside, like I use that example where it's a parent-child situation, right? Those are going to look a little bit different than abuse, neglect by a staff person. So, I mean, that term investigation is broad in the sense of an abuse, neglect, you know, exploitation is going to tend to be a little bit more of a deeper dive, right? But that doesn't mean that other things aren't going to be investigated. So I don't want to, I guess I know that answer is hard, but it depends. I think every incident should have some sort of review. It's just going to look different, I think, depending on the circumstances. I mean, even, you know, mortality reviews for us, I mean, we're looking at every death is reviewed by us. It doesn't, if someone's in hospice and they've been in hospice for 6 months based on, let's say, cancer, that's going to look different, right, than some sort of abuse, neglect situation that could have caused the death. So I think, again, it just really depends on those circumstances, but we would expect everything to be looked at, I guess, and reviewed that occurs.
All right, and I apologize if we already addressed this one. I don't believe we did out loud. Jessica, would you talk a little bit about the role of the guardian and the need to have a guardian present during an investigation?
Again, I don't know that I can say yes or no here. I think it would depend on having those conversations with that guardian. You know, we do not, every time we talk to an individual, we do not call a guardian first. There are times when obviously the person wants their guardian there to sit with them when we talk to them, which is obviously totally fine. So again, I think that would be up to really a provider and having conversations within that team of sort of the protocols. And, you know, we reiterate, we support the person in service. The guardian is not in services, right? So our priority is that person. And obviously we're gonna, if they want the person with them, that's fine. But again, keeping that in mind, I know there's dynamics and things there that need to be, you know, that need to be conversations that need to be had around that. So I would encourage, again, when you're supporting someone, and especially as they're coming into services with you as a provider and a case manager, to, you know, have those conversations, you know, at the beginning.
All right, great. So someone said, so we don't need to do an IR for family if it is not abuse, neglect, or exploitation. I don't believe that is what we intended to say. And IR still needs to be done. I think that the message that we were trying to convey was that the investigation may look a little bit differently, but you do need to report those. Jessica, did you have anything in it?
Yes. Yeah, I was reading that question, Jean. I wasn't sure if I understood, but I think, yes, the way you clarified it is correct.
Okay. And then I also don't believe that we said that every incident should have an investigative summary.
Yeah, no, I think the investigative summary, I think, and I apologize because I wasn't on the very beginning, but I know Jennifer shared obviously information. I would say, and again, it's just going to look different, right? So I think everything to me needs to be documented, right? So if I have an IR, that's my documentation, right? But obviously the follow-up is all documented. So I think there needs to be documentation, right, for those things, which I know case managers are putting in case notes, writers are, filing the IRs, and there's that back and forth with the follow-up. So there needs to be documentation. I don't know that there needs to be a detailed, right, like 5-page summary of every single incident, it's not necessary. I mean, a lot of times on incidents, because sometimes they're just, depending on the circumstances, they don't need as thorough of a review. And I'm sure you guys conveyed that at the beginning, but hopefully that makes sense. I'm not saying, I think that would take a lot of time, and again, is not necessary. We've done a lot of review on, I'm going back to the mortality situation, but because we were doing a lot of digging into things when someone, like I said, was in hospice, and realizing, that's not the point, right? I think we have certain resources, and we need to make sure that we're putting those resources where they need to be. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think if I can just add, there's the abuse, neglect, exploitation. We are looking for a full investigation that you submit, that you share with the team. For other incidents, if we can go back to what Jennifer was talking about with the root cause analysis, we do expect you to go back and try to figure out what happened. I know that as we're reviewing incidents, especially those with elopement, we're starting to look at what happened. Is it happening with the same staff person? Is it happening at the same time of day? Are there triggers? And so we do expect you to do that level of what I will call an investigation. And so sometimes we are asking those questions and expect them to be answered at the time of the follow-up, which I think may be happening a little more often than what providers have been used to in the past.
Mm-hmm. And I think there are things we're always going to ask, Gina, and you guys, I'm sure, mentioned this before, but I always want to know, was the individual talked to, right? I think we see that a lot, and I don't know how, that's the number one thing I would look at is, was the individual even asked what happened? And a lot of times the answer is no, and I will go back and say, why not, if that's not the case. And sometimes the answer is they didn't want to talk to us, and that's okay. But we need to know that, right? Like, I need to see that person was, we asked if they, and they just said, I don't really want to talk about this, or it upset them. And that needs to be documented, so we make sure that we see that, or we're going to ask every single time if we're not seeing that.
So we have someone asking if there is an official form to utilize as a guide for the investigative process. There is not, however, it is written into code and policy that there are mandatory components of an investigation. Mm-hmm. And so we can point you towards that resource if you need us to.
And we always encourage, again, like Janet said, that's the requirement, but if there are other things you're doing, that are part of that, that's okay too. There's not, obviously that's within our rules and regulations, but there might be other ways you guys are also doing things. And I think that's what Jennifer was, please let us know. If as you've worked in this field and, there are things that you tried and you think, hey, this has been more helpful, please share those best practices with us and we can share with other people.
So I believe that we have worked through most of the, okay. So Jessica, here's one that just came in. Someone is saying that they find it difficult for family to give medical records with the death of someone, and that BQIS seems to not understand when they cannot receive the information. So do you want to talk a little bit kind of how we've changed our approach?
No, I appreciate that question. That's something we actually have had conversation the last year about. We totally understand that. Someone's loved one has passed away, right? And that's a very, we understand the dynamics with that and sort of the sensitivity of it. And so I think that would be super helpful if we are asking for those records, and we try to be, we don't want to ask for those just to ask for them. And we've had a lot of conversation about that, right? I don't want to put people through more, it's already a difficult situation, and just to ask for records when we don't really need them. And so please, let us know about that if we're asking for something and maybe that hasn't come up. We're not realizing that the difference in, the situation. Please let us know that, the family, doesn't want to turn over the medical records or the circumstances with that. Definitely appreciate that information.
So then it looks like we have a series of questions regarding when the PowerPoint will be available, where it will be available, where checklists will be housed. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Jennifer and let her explain kind of what happens next in regards to getting stuff posted. There will also...
Can I make one comment just real quick to reiterate? Sure. Again, I want to be very clear that these are examples. There is no, I know we'll probably say this over and over, but there's no form that has to be used. Besides, obviously, our policy, you need to follow that and rules and regulations. But these are just examples, best practices of things. It looks like people are willing to share forms. We love that. So please, you guys, Jennifer can share her information, or me, whoever, but anything you're willing to share, we're happy to, we really appreciate it because we want to share information to other providers. I think that's the best way to learn from each other. I know is super helpful. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, and this is Jennifer, as far as getting this information, I will go ahead and I have to convert the recording, and then I have to get it to communications. Everything has to be 508 compliant. So it may take up to a week for this to get posted, but it will go on the main BQIS website, and we will send out a DDARS announcement through the listserv that says that it's been posted and that it's available. The recording itself will go on the BQIS playlist on the FSSA YouTube channel. That's where they house most of the recording. I'm happy to send you a PDF of the slides. We can add that to the resources that I have on the slide that's available. We've had these before through the data driven review, so they may not be new to some of you. Some of you may not have seen them if you weren't involved in part of that process. So again, as Jessica said, there's a list of 18 mandated components, and it includes specifics for mortality. I can provide that in kind of an investigation checklist for you. So again, it's not necessarily the template that you have to follow, but kind of a way for you to keep track of, have I done the mandated components of an investigation? And then as we were talking about root cause analysis, we do have some templates and guidance around that if you want some examples. And for the comprehensive quality improvement plan, we're not requiring that, but again, it's a best practice, just like root causes. So if you would like a template and a way to kind of look at some of the things, that's part of what we do at Liberty, and what BQIS is doing is obviously, as we pull data and we look at trends, we're trying to address those so that we can ultimately reduce the number of incidents and try and improve the quality of services and life for individuals who are receiving services from us. So that's why Janet mentioned some of the questions that we're asking, because we're really trying to figure out what's going on with the individual rather than simply asking a series of questions, getting answers. We really want to know what's going on and how can we best help them and improve their quality of life. So I will get all of those, and the announcement will take you exactly to the link. But at any time, if you would like to share a best practice or a resource with BQIS, you can send it to BQIS help at fssa.in.gov, or you can always send it to me as the training and engagement manager. I'm kind of the clearinghouse of that information, and it's jennifer.akers, AKERS, at fssa.in.gov. It should be on the emails you've been getting from Zoom, or I just follow the pattern of everybody else's email of just first name dot last name. So I'm a resource to you throughout the year. If you haven't met me yet at Copper, I will probably be joining your wrap-up meeting so that we can actually meet one another. But I'm available throughout the year for resources that would be helpful to you. So feel free to reach out to me or to bequist.help@fssa.in.gov. And again, when I send the survey, if you could complete that, that kind of helps us. In addition to those of you who filled out the survey about training needs, I don't think we have a shortage of topics. It's just a matter of prioritizing them. So if you don't see your topic on the list, it doesn't mean it's not coming. It's just a matter of prioritizing them. So I hope that answers that question. Is there anything else?
Just in addition, we had lots of questions come in and we did our best to sort through them and to answer them. We will go back at the conclusion of this and look at the questions. We know who asked specific questions, and if we find that we did not address any of them, Jennifer will be able to send you a follow-up email and address your specific questions individually.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is correct.
There was one more question I think we can answer really quickly. That's a great one. It had to do with the IR follow-up questions, and are these automatically generated or are they specific for each incident? Great question. I think we review every single incident. Someone actually reads the incident. There are some general questions that we tend to ask that, you know, like I can't even think of one off the top of my head, but like an elopement, we're going to look for certain information in that narrative. If it's not there, we're going to ask it. But then there are general, you know, we read every one and there are specific questions that we will ask. So again, going back, it's very helpful in those narratives to be as detailed as possible. I mean, we know that you're not going to necessarily maybe have all the information, but we're going to ask specific questions that's not there. So I wanted to address that because I think that's a good clarification question.
Okay.
And also Facebook, if you guys don't follow us, as Jennifer mentioned, we will share we can share the slides on Facebook. You know, we'll post them as well. That's a good way to follow us for other trainings. We put everything on our Facebook page pretty much. So if you do have Facebook and you want to follow us there, there's the links. Please do so. And you can watch us on Facebook Live too.
Yeah, usually the announcements that a training is coming up goes out through the listserv, and then once the recording materials are available and posted and where it is also goes out through the listserv, and the listserv information usually goes to the Facebook page. So choose your method of communication, but that's where you should be able to find this. But again, if for some reason you cannot find it in about a week, give me some time to get it through communications and get it posted. You can always reach out to me and I'm happy to help you find it. All right, I want to thank everyone. Please look for that survey, and if you could take the time to complete it, that would be great. So I think we are done. We will do follow-up with anything that we need to follow up with, and we appreciate you joining us. Thank you and have a great day.